Thank you very much, Singamati. It's very good to be back at the Birmingham Buddhist Centre. I think I was here last year or the year before. Lose track of time, but very good to be speaking here again to the Sangha Night class. The title of my talk is, again,
Friends, Teachers and Liberation of the Heart.
Friends, Teachers and the Liberation of the Heart. I do know what it is about, don't I? And I was thinking earlier, so this is the Birmingham Buddhist Centre, and a couple of weeks, just over, well, nearly 2 weeks ago, I was at the Sheffield Buddhist Centre. I go to the Sheffield Buddhist Centre a couple of times a year, and earlier on in the year I was at the London Buddhist Centre. So there are all these Buddhist centres, which means, of course, that these are centres, places, environments which are devoted to the Buddha and his teachings, and the community of those who follow or even committed to the Buddha and his teachings. So you're all here because you're either committed to Buddhism or thinking about being committed to Buddhism, or just trying things out. And of course we have the big Buddha image and other Buddhist imagery all around. And of course it's worth reflecting on the fact that the Buddha lived and taught in a world very, very different from our own. A very, very different world indeed. And in a way, it's sort of rather miraculous that we are Buddhists or have a sympathy to Buddhism when you think about the very great differences between the world in which the Buddha operated in and the world that we're operating in, that we're living in. It's really well worth pausing and reflecting upon that. Our conditions and our assumptions and our outlook is so very, very different from the world, the people of the Buddha in his time. And of course it's worth reflecting on the fact that the Buddha was a homeless wanderer. I was talking with Ollie and Hannah, is it Hannah? About home and homelessness in the tea break. The Buddha was a homeless wanderer. He had no possessions. All he had were his 3 patched, what we call them robes, but really they're kind of discoloured cloth. That's what they really were. They weren't sort of ecclesiastical garments, which the word robe conveys. They would have been patched, discoloured cloth, perhaps even patches of cloth gathered from the cremation ground. He would have a begging bowl, of course, and I think there are a few other bits and pieces that the wandering community of that time, what they call the Shramana community, the sort of non-Brahmin, non-caste, non-Vedic, sort of almost anti-Hindu kind of wandering community, if you like. They were kind of outside of society. That's all they would have had. Wandering from place to place in the rainy season, being in one place, in retreat. And many of the Buddha's disciples, of course, were other wanderers like himself. Mostly what we call monks, although that gives the wrong impression, but also, remarkably, the Buddha was one of the first teachers who had a following of full-time women monastics, also wandering, really quite remarkable. And if you look in the scriptures, the songs of the elder nuns, as they're called, the teris, are really quite extraordinary, and they make you kind of, they make strong men weep, if you like, some of the songs that they sing. Really quite remarkable. But of course, he also had many, many disciples who were, you can call householders, people with, families and children and running businesses and things like that. But the world was very, very different. Very, very different assumptions in his time. And as I say, it's well worth reflecting on that. Very well worth reflecting on our own circumstances. And I was saying it's sort of quite miraculous, really, that people have an interest in Buddhism, and even more miraculous that people regard themselves as followers of the Buddha in these times, which are so complicated, so weird. In the Buddha's time, it would have been so quiet, so silent. No electronic devices at all, no electricity. Bullock carts is probably the fastest, chariots, horse chariots were probably pretty fast, but they were quite rare probably. Bullock carts were the way you travel, or just a lot of walking, and the whole of most of the northern India where the Buddha was operating was covered in what they call the great forest, the Mahavana. So very, very different world in which the Buddha was operating. So I just wanted to, reflect on that, on, if you like, the differences between our circumstances and the Buddha's world. But nonetheless, even though it was different, of course, human beings throughout history are, in a sense, the same. When we get down to it, we are, human beings always have the same recurring issues, the same recurring problems. The Buddha was addressing not just the sort of local difficulties of his time and place, but much, much deeper existential issues that we face today. Perhaps the most fundamental being what to do. We're born, we live, we pass away. Of course, in the Buddha's time, many people believed in rebecoming, but nonetheless, even though there is rebecoming or rebirth, there is still the recurring question. We're alive, we've been given our life for a certain period of time. We don't know how long, actually. Death is inevitable, but the time of death is unknown. Nobody can predict, not even the great enlightened Buddha can predict when a person's life comes to an end. There is also the recurring problem of illness and old age. And there's also that sense of, well, here I am, and even though I have a home and money and friends and a job and all the rest of it, and it's going very nicely, thank you very much, there's still this deep sense there must be something more. There must be a different way of living, or if not a different way of living, a different way of seeing the world than what is on offer, what is presented. These issues are eternal, if you like. They go with being embodied. They go with being human. They go with being in life. Here we are. What do we do? How do we live? What is meaningful for us? Sometimes that can be accompanied with a very strong sense of being, if you like, restricted, hemmed in. You don't quite know why. It might be because you think, God, this society in which I live, there seems to be, in a sense, so much freedom of choice, all that kind of consumer freedom that we were offered. You remember years ago? You don't hear it so much nowadays. I remember there was a sort of period when, when the NHS came up, and they'd always be going on about choice. You could choose where to have an operation and, what your best health path was to do with things. And I thought, well, I don't want choice. I just want to know that people can do the job properly. You know what I mean? It's like these really weird ideas of freedom. So we have all these options, but that doesn't answer the issue. You can still feel this tremendous sense of restriction, of limitation, as though your heart is constricted. Doesn't matter where you go, out into the countryside, travelling to the other side of the world, having sort of, boundless opportunities of clicking on Amazon Marketplace, all the technology available, all the DVDs and streaming that you can imagine. My technology is a bit hazy here. You still feel that sense of restriction and limitation. Doesn't matter what's on offer, there's that sense that the heart is tight, the mind is tight, even a bit sort of frozen. So the Buddha sometimes, in some of his discourses, talks about enlightenment, the state of being a Buddha, as the liberation of the heart, the chitta vimoksha. The word chitta, I'm translating it here as heart, but it can also be translated as mind and heart. So it's all that sort of, in Indian tradition, mind, the distinction between, if you like, thought and emotion, doesn't really obtain. There is such a thing as thought, there is such a thing as emotion, but there is such a thing as volition, all that sort of side of things. But it's one word, chitta, that's used, consciousness. But I like this phrase, the liberation of the heart. Perhaps it's more expressive. So enlightenment is a completely boundless heart. There's absolutely no limitation on it whatsoever. Even if you were incarcerated in the deepest dungeon, if you had that heart's liberation, that would not be imprisonment. There would be unbounded loving kindness, unbounded wisdom, unbounded energy. Doesn't matter what anybody did to you, what anybody accused you of, wherever you were, whoever you were with, there would be that boundless, creative, unfolding, continuously unfolding heart. You wouldn't even regard it as your heart, because the distinction between self and other just would not obtain, would not be there. So the Buddha sometimes talks about the state of enlightenment as the liberation of the heart. And, well, I know for myself, just in talking about this, I really would rather like to be in that. If I don't know how you describe it, be in it, have it, sport in it, play in it. But wouldn't that be lovely to have that liberation of the heart? But I don't know if you can relate to that sense of constriction. Perhaps you can feel it. But imagine no constriction, no anxiety, no worry, no fear, no tension. It doesn't matter what's going on with the body, even with physical pain or all those things, just this open-endedness, vastness, all the time. That's the state of Buddhahood, and a tremendous flexibility of response to whatever is arising, whatever you're presented with. That gives us some sort of sense, perhaps, rather prosaically, of a state of mind which is really beyond all words, all language, all understanding, the state of Buddhahood. So sometimes the Buddha talked about enlightenment in that way, a very appealing way, I think, of talking about enlightenment. And there is quite a famous discourse where he relates this liberation of the heart to the whole issue of teachers and friends and other aspects of the Dharma. It's quite a famous story in Triratna. It's one of our sort of, part of our, canon, if that's the right word, of Buddhist texts. And it's a rather nice story. The story is of the Buddha was staying in a place called Chalika. I probably don't know quite where Chalika is, on a hillside called Chalika Hill. So he's staying there. Probably it could have been around rainy season time, I don't know, or he was just passing through there. And he had an attendant, a young attendant with him. The Buddha always had, with him, somebody, usually a younger monk, who would kind of look after his his sort of physical needs, made sure there was water there for him to drink. Perhaps keeping an eye on visitors, because you can imagine the Buddha was regarded as a guru, a teacher, so people were often wanting to seek him out, either his monk and nun disciples, lay disciples, sometimes kings, politicians would turn up for advice about this or that. It's quite remarkable, the kind of questions that the Buddha would get asked sometimes about all sorts of subjects. But if you've lived in India and you've been around that's the kind of social function very often as well of great teachers. So anyway, he had this attendant named Meghiya, a young attendant. And Meghiya said to the Buddha, he said, Bhante, I wish now to go and collect my alms food in the local village. I'd like to go and beg my food. So this is the Indian tradition. This is the Buddhist. This is the traditional way of approaching things. You don't just do things off your own back. Oh, I'm just going to go on my begging round now. Bye. You ask out of courtesy to your teacher who you're with if it's all right to do that. And the Buddha replied to Meghiya, do what you think it the time for, Meghiya. If you think it's the right time to go and beg your food, go and beg your food. So off Meghiya went to the local village. He would have stood outside of every house till his bowl would have been full, and this would have happened in the early morning, I should just say, because there was a time when the disciples would beg at all times of day, and the lay people, the household people, complained. This is really, really, really inconvenient for us, because we do all our cooking in the morning, and that's when we eat. So it'd be better if they came in the morning to get their food. There's a little detail. So it would have been early in the morning. So he got his food, and then he had to find a nice place to eat his food, and he found an absolutely wonderful place. He found a mango grove beside a river in which to have his food, eating it all sort of mashed together, sweets and savouries and liquids and solids, all moulded together in one bowl. That's the way they ate. And he thought, this mango grove is wonderful. Now, mango groves, I don't know if you've ever been in a mango grove in India, but they really are wonderful places. Mango groves, mango trees generally have very dark green leaves, and they're very cool in the heat. Wonderfully cool. Finding a good mango grove is a major achievement in the countryside in India, and you really don't want to leave them. And he was thinking, this is a great place. As he was eating, this is a wonderful place. I think this is a place where I could meditate. I could come here and I could really crack on with my meditation, and I could attain that liberation of the heart that the Buddha's been talking about, that enlightenment. I could do that. I could really do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask the Buddha, I'm going to ask the Lord, Bhante, to give me permission to come here. If he gives me permission, I'm going to come here and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to gain enlightenment. So pleased with himself, very excited. So he went back to the Buddha and he said, Lord, I really want to strive for enlightenment. And there's this mango grove that I found, and it's perfect. It's perfect for meditation. And if you will give me permission, I will go there and I will strive for full and complete enlightenment. And the Buddha simply said, wait, Meghiya. I'm alone. Wait till somebody else comes to look after me. So it's not the kind of response Meghiya was hoping for. So he repeated the same question. There's this mango grove. I really do want to gain enlightenment. It's a perfect place. I'm going to go there. I'm going to meditate and gain liberation. And the Buddha said again, wait, Meghiya. I'm on my own. Wait for somebody else to come and look after me. So Meghiya, you can imagine, poor chap, he must be, he's must be thinking the Buddha's a bit selfish, wanting to be looked after when he wants to gain enlightenment. So he said, Lord, you have achieved what needs to be achieved. You've gone to the end of the training. I have not done that. I have not achieved what needs to be achieved. If you please give me permission to go to the mango grove and gain enlightenment. And the Buddha says, well, Meghiya, if you talk about gaining enlightenment, what can I say? Do what you think it the time for. And I can imagine the Buddha's little smile as he said that. So Meghiya, so happy, so excited, goes to the mango grove. The text says he plunged into that mango grove. He went to the root of a tree, and he sat down. You can just imagine it, can't you? Getting all set up in meditation, proper posture, straight back. This is it. And what happened? Well, he was just assailed with lustful thoughts. Just constantly, it doesn't tell us what these lustful thoughts were. Fortunately, the Pali texts are quite reticent about such things, but from our own experience, I'm sure we can imagine what he was craving. Lustful thoughts, hateful thoughts, and violent thoughts. It was just a massive kind of hindrance blast, hindrance storm, completely overwhelming. He just couldn't meditate. And, he really had to go. He spent the whole day there really pushing to overcome himself and break through, but couldn't do it. So he thought, this is amazing. He's a bit naive, I think, Meghiya. It's really amazing. I left home to follow this spiritual path, to follow the Buddha's path. And here I am. I've decided to gain enlightenment, and I'm just overcome with lust and hate and violence. This is amazing. This is weird. So, at the end of the day, he goes back to the Buddha. You can imagine he was probably feeling a little bit shamefaced and a little bit disappointed, perhaps. And he told the Buddha what happened. He explained what had happened and how amazing it was. I'm going to, before I get to the Buddha's reply, I just want to pause here for a minute, just about the exchange between the Buddha and Meghiya, this business of wait, don't go, stay. I mean, if you think about it, it's a little bit strange that Meghiya doesn't want to stay with the Buddha. If you really think about it, I mean, I'm sure we would all think, crikey, what if the Buddha was there? I'd be quite happy to stick around. I'd be quite happy to be around and, bringing him his water and make sure that nobody was bothering him, because you'd be right next to enlightenment. You'd be in the full presence of wisdom and compassion. But sometimes it seems that even people who were physically close to the Buddha couldn't see the Buddha as the Buddha. This is really interesting. When we read these stories in the Pali text, we see that word Buddha, and we think, oh yeah, he would have looked, like that. So we would have known who he was, but maybe not. Maybe not at all. Maybe, okay, he's our teacher, but, teachers, smeechers, a bit sort of over-familiar, if you like, over-familiar, not really seeing the full significance of who you are with. It's very, very easy, I think, to take for granted, our teachers and friends and our spiritual friends. Very easy to take for granted just other human beings. They're so familiar to us. So we don't really open to them and really see the full significance of them. I think that's one of the great besetting sins, if you like, of us human beings. We don't often see the value of what we have and who we have, and therefore we don't really learn. We don't really take in. So when we're considering, who our teachers are, who our friends are, Sometimes they might be right in front of us and we don't really know that they're there. We think they're somewhere else. You know, the great teacher is over there, he's on YouTube, or he's in India, or he's in, Tibet, or he's, in another part of the world. That special someone who we go to, who gives us the special teaching that's going to change our lives with the minimal amount of fuss involved, minimal amount of effort involved. Well, sometimes the teacher is right in front of us, and all we have to do is be with them, and sometimes even serve them. It's very interesting being in a Buddhist centre that I'm not saying that Singamati is a Buddha or Dharmashalan is a Buddha or the order members. But what you do have in a Buddhist centre is you do have the Buddha. You do have the Buddha in the sense of the Buddha image to remind us of the enlightened presence, which we have to imagine. Is very, very important. And what you have in a Buddhist centre are people who have a very, very deep feeling and even reverence for the Buddha, for the enlightened presence, for that focus of wisdom and compassion. That is there in a Buddhist centre if the Buddha is truly revered and there's a real feeling for the Buddha. There is something Buddha-like pervading the centre. So sometimes we need to reflect on that and really value, what is very, very familiar, what is there every day, and not underestimate it and think that it's all somewhere else. So that's the first reflection. But let's come to what the Buddha says to Meghiya. Well, he doesn't rebuke him, doesn't tell him off and saying, "You silly boy, why don't you listen to me and stay?" The Buddha, very, very compassionate. What he does, he gives the teaching, gives a wonderful teaching. He says this: when the liberation of the heart is immature, 5 things conduce to its maturity or its maturing. When the heart's release or the heart's liberation is immature, 5 things lead to its maturing. This is a lovely imagery here, the maturing of the heart's liberation. I really like that. And the word I can't remember quite the Pali, but the Sanskrit is Paripachana. Paripachana. It's actually related to a word you might be familiar with in modern Indian language. It's related to the word paka. Paka literally means cooked. You have kacha and paka in Marathi and Hindi, the languages I'm familiar with. Kacha means uncooked, paka means cooked. But paka has also associations with soft, and therefore with ripe. Paripachana can also be translated as ripening as well as maturing. So you're talking about something expanding and soft, rather than something hard and tight. That's what you're getting at. So when the heart's liberation is unripe or immature, uncooked, 5 things conduce to its ripening and its maturing. Lovely imagery. And of course, he's saying that we need to ripen and mature and to soften. Because when you expand, because the heart's liberation is an expansion, you soften. You soften in relation to the world around you. It's less rigid, you're less hard in relation to things. It's this softening and opening. So the Buddha gives this teaching of these 5 things. And the first of these, he says, is Kalyana Mitrata. When you're immature, when your liberation is immature, the first thing that you need, the most fundamental thing you need, is Kalyana Mitrata, which is hard to translate into English. Mitrata means friendship. That's familiar enough. A mutuality of love, loving kindness, of metta, a mutuality of that. Kalyana, it's often translated as spiritual, but that doesn't sort of help us very much. Kalyana is absolutely wonderful word. In modern Indian languages, it just simply means lucky. But it conveys so much. It does mean auspicious, fortunate, but more importantly, it means skillful. That which conducive to the skillful, the good. In other words, that which is developing in us awareness, loving kindness, compassion, intelligence, wisdom, and so on and so forth. It also means lovely and beautiful. It means those things. So this is really, really important, as if to say, actually, the skillful, the good, is beautiful, is lovely. And good things will follow, because if you act skillfully, karmically, of course, you're creating what is called merit, you're creating benefit for yourself and others. And that's in other words, you make your own luck, you make your own fortune. So it's a friendship that creates this. It's a friendship which is characterized by this. It's a friendship with someone where you're both encouraging each other, the good, the skillful, the beautiful, the lovely, and the fortunate. So that's why it's as a shorthand, it's translated as a lovely friendship. In the tradition, of course, it's pretty obvious the point that the Buddha is making. He's saying that, Meghiya, if you'd just stayed with me, you would just be in spiritual friendship. You'd be with your teacher. In the tradition, it's very much a vertical spiritual friendship between the less experienced and the more experienced. It's like that. And we know why this is so. That so much comes out of it. Meghiya's problem was that his approach to Buddhist practice was very individualistic. He thought he had already the ability to do it on his own. It was very, very self-willed. It was as if he thought just through sheer will and aspiration he could break through to the liberation of the heart. That's not an uncommon error. I think especially, when people are younger, very often. I certainly felt like that, that I could, as it's sometimes called, make a smash and grab raid on the absolute. That here I am now, and just with the here I am now, I can punch through to reality, get it, and everything will be all right. I banged my head against that for a long time, even though I was ordained into an order. There's still this same sort of attitude, a rather grasping attitude to higher states of consciousness. There's something in it. There's obviously you do need to be very, take a lot of responsibility to live the Buddhist life and have a lot of energy and apply energy. Nobody can live the life for you, as the Buddha says, by you must the zealous effort be made. The Buddha's only show the way. He's very, very clear on that. But that can harden into something very, very, very willful and unintelligent, because it's not leading to this maturing of the heart's liberation. Yes, you need to make effort, but you need to make it within a context. And being around spiritual friends who can inspire you, encourage you, instruct you, teach you, listen to your difficulties, answer your questions, and just their presence. Just their presence. In Indian tradition, even today, they talk about the importance of darshan, taking sight of the holy man, just being in their presence. And a lot of the time that this was practiced in the Buddha's day. The disciples would just come and just be with the Buddha, sometimes all through the night, sitting in meditation, just being in his presence. And sometimes they talk about that, just the Sangha, being in the presence of one another. You can practice it here when we meditate. In a way, we're replicating what the ancient tradition did. We're gathering around the Buddha. We're trying to imagine what it's like to take the darshan of the Buddha, to be around that higher dimension. In this way, the Buddha himself can be our Kalyana Mitra, can be our spiritual friend. We have to imagine him. We have to bring him into our mind's eye. We have to sort of feel that, yes, in some strange way, the Buddha is sitting with us in Moseley, in Birmingham, or in our own bedroom, or in our own home. We can, there's this practice, traditional practice called the recollection of the Buddha, the constant mindfulness of the Buddha. And what you're doing is you're trying to imagine enlightenment as your friend, as your spiritual friend, as your Kalyana Mitra, to inspire you and move you. But of course, you also need to be with actual human beings who you can talk to, who can talk to you. They might be miles from enlightenment, but they have a feeling for the Buddha, and they may have been practicing longer than you, and you can really learn from them. So first of all, you need that, for that maturing of the heart's liberation, you need to be around spiritual friends. You need Kalyana Mitras. You need to get as much of it as you can, and take every opportunity, to be with them. Every opportunity. It doesn't necessarily mean always meditating with them or being in study sessions with them. Sometimes it might be working alongside them. I'm sure Singer Matti and the other order members are constantly asking for volunteers, to help run the centre. Through that you can actually experience Kalyana Mitrata. Some of my strongest experiences of spiritual friendship has been working with people, working for the Dharma with people. We haven't even been, talking together very much, but we're there doing something together for the Dharma. I remember one of my strongest experiences of friendship with two very, very close friends, probably my closest friends in the order. We were we came along at the same time, we were ordained in the same year, and we ended up working together at Padmavajra. And just by chance, the three of us came to the Buddha shrine to make offerings, just the three of us together. And all three of us, without knowing it, were actually deeply moved by this act together. It seemed the most eloquent expression of friendship, making our offerings to the Buddha. We weren't looking at each other. We were standing shoulder to shoulder, bowing in the direction of the Buddha. So sometimes spiritual friendship can be like that. But anyway, I'll move on. Time's marching, I think. So what does the Buddha say next? He says the second thing you need to attend to when the liberation of the heart is immature is it's basically ethics. The basic ethical code. To give it to the shorthand, the commitment to the Patimokkha, as it's called, the particular code of ethics that leads to liberation. The Sanghavara Patimokkha. You make a commitment to your basic ethics. So, of course, I'm sure you're all aware of the 5 basic Buddhist precepts. So you need to change your conduct if you're going to have the liberation of the heart. You can't go straight to enlightenment unless you're going to change your behaviour, abstaining from harming living beings, developing loving kindness, and really trying to follow that through in the different areas of life. But perhaps changing diet, moving from eating meat to being a vegetarian, even a vegan. Abstaining from taking the not given, practicing generosity. Abstaining from sexual misconduct and practicing contentment. Abstaining from false speech and practicing truthfulness. Abstaining from drinks and drugs that intoxicate the mind and practicing a clear and radiant mindfulness and awareness. And it's going back to that speech, and of course there are other speech precepts, not just speaking the truth, but speaking kindly to people, speaking helpfully to people, and not slandering people, not gossiping, but practicing harmonious speech. And speech or communication generally, I think, is a huge issue these days with the whole rise of social media. I mean, it's really quite scary the way people seem to be very freely smashing the speech precepts via social media. It's really quite scary to sort of see that, the way that can happen, where you can have harshness and slander. I mean, I've found this myself, that suddenly sending that harsh email, you know, and suddenly to my horror realising I've hurt someone, and you know, learning the discipline of putting it in drafts before I press send, and then reading it and then deleting it and completely getting rid of it and things like that. I think I had to apologise to you once, didn't I, because of a very, very thoughtless, unhelpful email. How could I have done that to Singamati? Terrible behaviour. You know, if we're breaking the precepts in this way, how can we possibly liberate the heart? We're actually doing things which restrict it, that limit it, you know, in our behaviour, in our everyday life. You know, and if we're clouding the mind through intoxicants, how can the mind be liberated? It's just a fog. Fog can't be liberated. Fog disappears into space. That's what has to happen. So we need that, and the Buddha says here that you see even danger in the smallest faults, in the tiniest faults. And sometimes, you know, when you read it, God, that's a bit over the top. You know, surely the Buddha won't mind if, you know, a few drinks at Christmas, you know, a little bit of, you know, banter with the lads and the lasses. You know, nothing wrong with a, you know, hamburger now and then. You know, come on, loosen up, everybody. But sometimes these little things have huge consequences. Huge consequences. You know, those moments of unawareness where, you know, I notice even today, you know, even not this very day, but you know, sometimes in my community, you know, we can get into a bit of banter around the dinner table, and there's a bit of teasing, and then somebody's hurt. Just gone that bit too far, and you can see, and it has consequences. You know, it can break trust. So it might seem like a small thing, but it can really unravel. And I think also the training in the 5 precepts can prepare you to be ethically strong in times of danger and stress. I think there can be a terrible complacency among contemporary Buddhists. You know, well, you know, I'm a good person. I wouldn't harm anybody. I'd love everybody all the time. But of course, we live generally, and I know it's not true for everybody, but we live generally in a pretty safe and secure society. I personally don't know how I'd react and respond if my life was under threat, or life of my loved ones was under threat. I'm not convinced that I might be capable of bad things. So this is why we've got to be really rigorous in our ethical training, really follow it through, so that we really internalise our values in all circumstances. And of course, it will also have the effect in really supporting this maturing of the liberation of the heart. Then the Buddha says the next thing that you need is what's called Dhammakathā. Dhammakathā. Katha, K-A-T-H-A, katha, means something like talk, but it's deep, serious talk. This is talking the Dhamma. Talking the Dhamma. The medium is the message. You're talking the Dhamma, but the way you talk the Dhamma is the Dhamma. So it's getting together with people, maybe one other person or a small group of people, maybe even a big group of people, and you take a topic of the Dhamma, you take a topic of the Buddha's teachings, and you really explore it. You really go into it. You make sure you understand it, first of all, that you know what the Buddha is saying before you go to interpretation. There can be a bit of a mania of going too quickly into how does this relate to my experience before you've even understood what the Buddha is actually saying. First of all, you've got to understand, what does this verse mean? What does it really mean? Get that basic meaning in your mind. Maybe a verse from the Dhammapada. Then you start digging into it. What does this mean for me? What does it mean for you? How do we take it further? What are the implications of this particular verse? So you have this deep, searching exploration of the Dhamma, and you're doing it. You're doing it in order to bring about the liberation of the heart. To put down, the Buddha even says that this talk is concerned with renouncing those things that limit you. You know, all your attachments and narrow ways of thinking and seeing. Is to do with renouncing that, liberating yourself from that, and looking towards the truth, looking towards reality. And this kind of deep, this is what a Dharma study group should be like, by the way. Ideal study group has this kind of quality. I certainly believe, have found there have been moments, times in such Dhammakatha, in study groups like this, where the truth itself has really opened up. It turns into silence. You know, you move to the edge of language and into an open space. And the thing is, it's not that one person in the group has the absolute monopoly on the truth. There might be one person who's, you know, led the way, so to speak, but in a really good group, you're not bothered about, you know, who's more experienced, who's less experienced. You're there in the truth together. So in other words, you can really gain what they call insight or wisdom, transcendental wisdom, through a serious, deep talking of the Dhamma together. There are stories of disciples of the Buddha living in retreat on every new moon and every full moon night, staying up all night doing this kind of talking like this. Now that really would be quite a Dharma study group, an all night long, deep searching discussion of the Dhamma. You can imagine the pauses, the silence, the empty spaces, you know, as they move in and out of language to nudge each other further in the direction of reality. So that learning the Dharma, and of course, the more you learn the Dharma like that, you develop. I'm sort of changing my metaphors from the maturing of the heart's liberation, but it gives you a kind of ballast. It gives you a kind of gravity. A ballast in the sense that a ship has ballast in the storms of life. You know, you have something, you internalise the Dhamma in you. So whatever's coming up, whatever's happening, you can relate to it in terms of the Dhamma, in terms of the truth. You can bring the Dhamma to it. This is why I think memorising a favourite verse of the Buddha's teaching, just maybe one verse from the Dhammapada, half a verse from the Dhammapada, and just repeating it, reflecting on it, it's incredibly powerful. You know, because it's in you, it's in your heart, and it starts to transform you and change you. The next thing that the Buddha talks about for the liberation of the heart is virya, energetic effort, heroic effort. And this doesn't mean rushing around, you know, with lots of external energy. It's more particular than that. It's the effort to develop skillful states free from greed, hatred and delusion, and made up of their opposite, made up of generosity and love, clarity of mind, and the effort to turn away the unskillful states, to turn away greed, hatred and delusion. This is what's meant by effort, this constant application to put energy in the development of the wholesome and the eradication of the unwholesome. So this is associated particularly with meditation. Meditation, Sangharakshita, our teacher, defines it as the uninterrupted stream of skillful mental states. Whether you're sitting in meditation or whether you're walking around all the time, looking to constantly create the flow on deeper and deeper levels of skillfulness, so that the mind is constantly creative. Do you remember that wonderful booklet, Mind Reactive and Creative, he gave all those years ago? a constantly creative mind. Creative meaning skillful. So the flow all the time of love, or if not love, non-hate. You can actually practice non-hate, not giving in to ill will. Constant flow of contentment and generosity. Constant flow of clarity and awareness, and particularly clarity, awareness of the nature of things. One of the things that's very important to be aware of in terms of skillfulness is having a real sense of the law of karma. Knowing that skillful actions lead to benefit, knowing that unskillful actions lead to the opposite for self and other. That's the sort of basic Buddhist insight, if you like. So this constant stream of skillfulness. And of course, when you're meditating, if you're doing this, what then starts to open up is called dhyana. Higher states of consciousness, the absorptions, these states of the mind being very integrated, very expansive, blissful, clear, open, and perhaps most important of all, malleable, flexible, fit, wieldy, not in any way rigid, open, and yet strong and deep. And the reason why that is important is because of the fifth of the dhammas, of the things that lead to the maturing of the heart's liberation. And this is prajna, or wisdom. And the Buddha describes this very simply as knowing, seeing the rising and the passing away. The arising and the passing away. In other words, seeing the impermanence of all things, internally and externally. And all the time, this constant arising and ceasing, and arising and ceasing. It's not that ceasing is the final word, this is very important, but just the flow of change, arising and passing away. This is being communicated actually all the time. Reality is communicating this all the time. The great Zen master Dogen says, impermanent is a fact before our eyes. You don't need to do anything fancy, thinking of something elaborate and then not thinking about it. You just have to pay attention to what is happening. You just have to really watch those leaves falling, being blown around, by the wind. You just have to watch, those raindrops falling and those clouds passing. You just have to watch the coming and going of your breath and the changing, states of mind that flow through you and all the sensations. This will become a direct knowing if your mind is prepared, if it's soft and malleable and strong, prepared through all of the other practices actually, Kalyana Mitrata, ethics, Dhammakata, talking the Dhamma, Virya and meditation. If they're all there, then you can see. If they're not there, that confrontation with impermanence will break you. And we know this, don't we? We know this. When impermanence is presented, becomes very strongly to us, it can be catastrophic. When there is bereavement, when we lose somebody we love very, very much, when there's a big change like that, it breaks us in some ways. There can be grief and depression and so on. Our mind is not prepared. Going back to my smash and grab raid on the absolute, well, you might sort of see something, but it might drive you a bit nuts. Well, that's not helpful. That's not what the Buddha wants. That's not what Buddhist tradition wants. You don't want to sort of break yourself on the rocks of a sort of false enlightenment. You need to prepare yourself. You need to build up the conditions, the dhammas, these 5 dhammas, these 5 conditions that lead to the maturing of the liberation of the heart. And as the Buddha goes on with his discourse, he says they all come from Kalyana Mitrata. They all come from friendship. If that's there, all the other four will be there. And they'll be supported by the spiritual friendship. And you can see this because, let's take the topic of ethics. Sometimes in our lives we have real ethical dilemmas. We don't know what the best way to act is sometimes. Going and talking with a wise friend, a Kalyana Mitra, talking it over, we can get something specific where we can apply the principle to our actual circumstances. You know, the Buddhist precepts are very general, and we often need the wisdom of a friend and just wise counsel to find the specific way of acting. Also in spiritual friendship, they can hear our confession of faults. You know, when we fail, we can unburden ourselves. We could, you know, they might even point out our failings sometimes and our blind spots. Obviously, in spiritual friendship, that is where you're going to enjoy that deep, searching discussion of the Dhamma together. That, the more friendship there is, actually, the deeper discussion of the Dharma there can be. And certainly, you need, really good spiritual friends for meditation practice. People to, point the way to you when you're a bit stuck in meditation, or you're feeling a little bit jaded in meditation, who can inspire you and rouse you. And yes, spiritual friends can really help you, with wisdom, seeing into the truth. Sometimes, the confrontation with reality, as I've said, can be very, very strong. And a really good spiritual friend can tell you how to relate to that. How to deal with that. A friend of mine went to see Sangharakshita. This friend of mine had been really pushing at trying to see the truth. Kept going at it and going at it and going at it, even though he was weeding out seriously, getting seriously sort of, disturbed and depressed, and this hammering away at impermanence. I mean, nobody, some of us said, it might be an idea to back off, but he wouldn't listen to us. But he went to see Sangharakshita, and Sangharakshita said, have you ever seen rams butting their heads against each other? They do it for a while and then they have to sort of back off because it's, they're just breaking their heads on each other. He said, that's what you're doing. So you need to back off for a while. And you need to engage in the other kinds of practices. Yes, he could see that he was very keen on seeing into the truth, but he was just getting a headache through doing that. So, you need to kind of come back to those other practices, and then you maybe come back to reality, looking into the nature of things, on an entirely different basis. So there you are. This is the teaching of the Buddha on the 5 conditions, the 5 things, the word is dhammas in Pali, that lead to the maturing of the liberation of the heart. And if we practice these things, then yes, the liberation of the heart will start to happen. We'll experience our heart and mind maturing and expanding and releasing and opening up. And yes, eventually we'll forget all about ourselves, and then the enlightened practice really opens up. Sangharakshita once said, what's the end of the path? What's the end of the path? What is the path beyond all training? What is the spontaneous, compassionate activity of enlightenment? And, we're sitting there thinking, crikey, he's going to tell us what it is. Well, it's coming. And he said, you do what needs to be done. That's all. You do what needs to be done. But think about it. You do what needs to be done. There you are. You're with somebody. You're with a number of people. You're sitting on your own. There is nothing between you, nothing internally within you, that stops you responding with wisdom and compassion. There's no subjectivity. There's no mind-forged manacles, as William Blake calls them. There's just you and what needs to be done to enrich the world and to enrich others with enlightenment itself. There we are.